Hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Welcome, welcome. Want to check out that my snowball speaker is working here, so please let me know that you can hear me all right. And I'm delighted to be joining you all here. Noticing Ricky. Hi, Ricky from South Alabama. Frederick. Awesome. Lydia. Greetings from Poland. Hi, Lydia. Yes. And I'm going to learn to pronounce your name, but I see you here from Poland. Welcome, welcome, Diane. Hi, everyone. So as you noticed in the title, this week's topics are kind of interesting. They've been in the news a lot. We've been hearing a lot about them on the, the truther channels. And so let's dive into this. It's interesting because what I do with these lives is I'll of course look at suggestions that you offer, and I'll also tune in a few days before the live and just get a feeling around topics that want to be brought forward into the collective awareness to be explored in this very beautiful, power neutral, heart-centered way. And it's kind of interesting that a lot of times these topics, even though when I first sort of get the sense of them, they seem really different. And there's often some kind of correlation. And that's what I recognized when I was meditating on these two topics. So I'm hearing that we should start with 15-minute cities. For those of you that aren't aware of this phenomena, what we are hearing and even seeing evidence of is that part of the global elite agenda to manage humanity in a socialist kind of system, being controlled on every level, including how humanity is able and allowed to move around, how they access resources, how they earn their living, what sort of currency they're using, and so on. And so the concept of the 15-minute city, unfortunately, is this design where we would be placed into these regional sort of lockdown environments where we would not be allowed to travel outside of a 15-minute range from where we are residing. And I feel like there's a lot going on with this. There's a lot going on here. It has to do with everything. It has to do with surveillance. It has to do with socialist currency, centralized power dominant systems, models that control through AI, all aspects of the individuals that would agree to go into that kind of a system. And so these are being proposed. And of course, we understand that this is how these agendas get sort of spirited in. People aren't paying attention too much. The sort of general masses are not really up on it. And of course, this projected agenda has been touted as being a response to the global environmental crises, the global climate crises. So I'm going to do a presentation on that in a couple of weeks. I'm gathering some resources from people that I know that have really great inside information about this topic. And so I'm going to be presenting that later on down the road. But let's just, for this presentation, acknowledge that we are aware that this is part of the strategy around getting people en masse to agree to something like a 15-minute city. So what I'd like to inquire from the perspective of what do we need to know about this and how do we respond as activated, critical thinking, sovereign, independent beings to this energy that we're perceiving is being sort of placed as another one of these artificial agendas over our potential. Let's have a look at this. So I'm going to tilt the screen down. And begin shuffling. Very interesting. All right, so here's us. Interesting. Here's us. We're showing up as the emperor, which is often sort of like the patriarch power dominant model. What this feels like to me is it's us stepping into our power, us stepping into the authority that's our sovereign birthright. Okay, how do we respond? How do we respond? Okay, this is interesting. I'm going to speak about it in a minute. 3 of Swords is there. Past, this is what's being presented. The messenger, the Page of Swords brings the message, the intel. Oh, wow. Okay. 9 of Cups. This is getting interesting. The 9 of Cups card suggests that somehow this is an answer to our prayers, meaning that it creates a pathway for us to actualize more sovereign independence. So somehow through this, what's going to be brought to the surface socially and politically in all of its challenge is actually going to be part of what frees us from this system and gives us our sovereign power back. Yes, so we're going to be getting very, very strategic, creating really good boundaries. For those of you in Canada, you know, we're also petitioning and looking at this very unfortunate Bill C-11, especially here in British Columbia. We're resisting this on every level, and this bill has to do with, again, creating more censorship around our freedom of speech, particularly on the internet. So let's talk a little bit about different models that we activate to respond strategically, intellectually. Here is our, oh, wow. It's exactly what I imagined. I imagined this would be the kind of response that we could focus on. I love it. I'm going to speak about it in a minute here. Wow. Okay. So happy to be smiling about this. Let's talk about the 3 of Swords. So the 3 of Swords is, the guides are showing me we're going back 300 years and we're watching the progression of, interestingly, even how many aspects of our freedom to live on the land, to educate our children in the way that we choose, to birth our children where we choose, to care for our deceased loved ones in the way we choose. You know, I've been involved in this movement of what's called conscious crossing, or working with the home funeral movement. So there's a lot of legislation that has been slipped through, kind of unbeknownst to most of the mainstream populace, around taking the rights of how we care for our children as they're coming into the world, how we birth them. You know, it used to be that home births happened. everywhere, all over the planet. And more this became regulated. Way back in the 80s when I had my first child, I was part of a collective that were fighting to allow midwives to come back into the home and birth people's children from home if they chose that. And this went right to like the highest court in Canada. It was a huge fight, and it took a long time with a lot of pushback to create legislation that allowed, and still in different provinces, there's different regulations around this. And our care of our, deceased loved ones, unbelievable how those rights have been taken from us. Like if you look into this, it's incredible. You have to go through such a lot of rigmarole if you decide that you don't want your deceased loved one to go through the system, which is absolutely exploitive and totally controlling the scenario as people are grieving at the loss of their loved one, not acknowledging cultural practices and different degrees of personal autonomy around their choices of how to care for their deceased loved ones. So interestingly, over the last 300 years, they're saying, in a way, we've relinquished, kind of unconsciously or unaware, all these basic human rights to be born, to cross over, and to have our loved ones in charge of how they want that process to look, and the education process and so on. I mean, we understand, first of all, these school systems, these medical systems were put in place to be helpful to humanity, but slowly over time, that control energy got its claws in and put in all these clauses, put in all these legislations that when you go to say, actually, I want to have a sovereign choice around this, there is no longer an easy way to do that. So what I'm being shown is actually that we go deeper into the fight. We don't stop at the 15-minute cities, folks. We don't stop there. This is their tactic, right? The other side's tactic is that they distract us over here. The latest thing is we're doing this thing and it's going to be like this. And we're all like, oh my gosh, we're there sort of in the trenches fighting that fight. Meanwhile, they're taking all these other rights away from us. So what I was feeling around this exact topic has shown up here with our little page of Pentacles. And if you've been watching me for a while, this is about getting back to the land, getting your fingers in the dirt, getting back in touch with where your food comes from. You don't necessarily have to grow it yourself, but to have a relationship with the people that do grow your food, that it's not coming from the big grocery chain store whose supplies can be cut and your access to that resource can be monitored and prevented based on a social credit system. So here we have this opportunity to actually take what is being shown to us. This is our invitation to dig our heels in and not just stop at stopping 15-minute cities. Because the other thing, what I was intuiting this week, is they've got us looking over here, and meanwhile they're buying up all the farmland into these large corporate entities. So even if we wanted an option about, I don't want to live in the city, if these regulations are going to get more and more rigid and constricting, I want to live in a more rural, small town somewhere. Oh gosh, you can't buy property there anymore. It's all been bought up. So, let's actually pull the whole blind open here and look at what we're looking at, what is in front of us. This is their tactic, is to get us focused over here they're showing me it's kind of like that Eye of Sauron, look over this way. And meanwhile, over here, they're doing the actual things that will make it so that this is the only option available to us. They've got us sort of hemmed in. So, yeah, let's start with, as I say, expanding what our intention is going to be. We're not going to stop at preventing 15-minute cities. We're actually going to start advocating to have our rights back around birthing our children, caring for our deceased loved ones, educating our children, where we live, how we purchase property, like having collective purchasing options for people who want to live rurally and get back to a more sustainable, resource-based agricultural lifestyle, co-creative lifestyle, community-based lifestyle. Of course, people are going to want to stay in the major centers. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be having a whole frontline row of activists that are working around preventing this legislation to go through at that front line in the sand. Absolutely. But don't put all of our focus there. Don't put all of our attention there, because we need to also fill in the larger background of this issue, which is, let's reclaim our rights that have been slowly dismantled. And interestingly, very, very interesting, their tactic to defer our focus or distract us and, bring out the little thing while they're working on the big thing over here. The guys are saying we can do the same thing. We can focus on these other rights, and it kind of looks innocent in a way, right? Like if you're focusing on home schooling and home birthing and stuff like that, people are like, oh, well, whatever. But if you gain traction and you gain, initiatives in these areas, if we regain some of the things that we've lost over the last 300 years, it's like they're not looking at what we're doing over here. We are setting a course, laying a new pathway, and we're doing it in that same long-term, miles to go, seeing the larger goals that we're going for. And we're not only falling into this trap of burning ourselves out on the front line around 15-minute cities. So I guess the big message here, folks, is that this is a much bigger systemic call to arms, call to action. And if you're called to the front line around legislation, urban legislation, and you're committed to being an urban dweller for the rest of your days and not having to face this kind of tyranny, then absolutely form your coalitions. And I, wish you all the best. So many blessings from all of us. And any of you that feel called to respond by looking out at the larger systemic issues and getting involved in communities, cooperatives, collectives, groups of people that are problem solving and working on reclaiming our sovereign rights in all these other areas. This feels to me like we're going to slowly start gaining traction. Well, we already are. And like diversifying our approach is actually suggesting that we have faith in our strength, and that these causes are so obvious. They're so basic human values that they will start to generate more momentum. One of the things I talked to a couple of my friends and colleagues about these topics before I presented today. And one of the consensus responses was people are so tired. They're so tired of defending these different concepts. They're so tired of standing on the front lines and trying to convince the masses and wake people up and so on. And what this is showing me is that, again, we're maybe getting a little tired of signing the petitions and going to the rallies. And it's not that those things aren't important. Absolutely they are. And they're saying, let's freshen up a bit and apply some different approaches that we might actually find enjoyable. It might start to get fun to look at ways to create different options, different models. And I've been talking about this for quite a while, and I intend to follow through on what I've been speaking about and make good on my promises. I've just recently put out my e-workbooks tarot volume 1 and 2 on my website. It was a lot of work to kind of coalesce all these offerings that I've been developing over the last 4 or 5 years, really. And I just finally launched this. You can see a link below to order these books off my website. So I've been very focused on completing that project. And of course, these things always take longer than you expect. So thank you for bearing with me. And really at this stage in the game, I'm ready to dive into these online offerings, sharing new paradigm solutions in some sort of format where we get to collaborate, have group discussions around this. So this is what I'm intending to focus on for this next month. And hopefully I'm going to have offerings out by the end of April. Hang in there with me, everybody. So, hello. Yes. Sue, Moon Garden, Diane, blessings to you all. Hi, Angela. Lovely to see you. Oh, thank you. So interesting that I visioned a connection between the international refugee crisis and the 15-minute cities. I'm wondering if any of you have an idea what that connection might be. You have to sort of sit back and think for a minute about this. It's like, okay, the 15-minute cities are really about, first of all, preventing people. I mean, the whole name, 15-minute city, it's preventing people from traveling much outside a 15-minute radius of where their home base is. So right away, to me, that says like a form of lockdown, a form of curfew, a form of controlling how people move around, one, and where they are allowed to live, two. Refugee crisis, responding and creating systems to respond to people's need, desire to move around freely, to find a place to call home and feel safe in, and to be free to earn a living, connect directly with the resources that they need for their survival. So what I was noticing about this, and it's a huge, huge topic. It's a very emotionally charged topic from all sides. And I want to just sort of delicately touch in on the complexity of that. But I really want to bring your attention first and foremost to the link between controlling, placing us into these frameworks where we have very little freedom in where we live and how we move around, and creating models based on the international refugee crisis that's underway. Well, it's really been there all the way along. There's never been a time in humanity where people haven't been fleeing from some sort of either natural disaster or political conflict. social, political, economic disaster. So this is a phenomena. And of course, now that we're such massive numbers of population on this planet, when displacement happens, it's a huge influx or migration of individuals that has a very big impact on locales, resources, and so to me, what we're doing is we're zoning, sort of scoping out a little bit and saying, oh, this is actually the same challenge. It's about how do we place people in sovereign relationship to where they live, freedom to move if they need to move. But what do we offer them when they arrive in a new place? Do we put them into some kind of, basically internment camp? And what does that say about us and the 15-minute city concept? It's so similar. This, what if it's us that has a natural disaster or a social political conflict that we are needing to escape from, and we aren't allowed to leave the region we're in, and then we're not allowed to leave the neighborhood we're in. So again, I'm asking everyone to sort of back up from the really emotionally charged, polarizing debate at the front line there and say, this is a large, systemic, global challenge. And the responses to that challenge could be part of what we are designing that makes so much more sense in the big picture for all of us. This is not just let's deal with this crisis and we dealt with it. It's over now. We can go on another decade or two without another one. We realize we're not in that paradigm anymore. It's not like, I always say this phenomenon. I know it used to happen to me. I'm almost embarrassed and ashamed in a way to admit it, but I always for years was a low income single mom that had old beater cars. And I would often break down in very, unfortunate circumstances without a lot of finances to repair my vehicle and get me back on the road easily. And it was so traumatic for me with children in tow and stuff like that. And so for years after, when I was able to afford better vehicles and better maintenance and, emergency road service and so on, when I would drive and see somebody on the side of the highway with their vehicle, my first thought was, oh, thank goodness it's not me. I would feel like the anxiety that I used to feel. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful that I'm not there, And then over years, I started to go, I don't feel good right now about feeling that way. Like that doesn't feel good. It feels upsetting to me. And so then for a lot of years, I would just blow blessings and prayers to those people. And it's really only been in the last little while that I'm like, oh, wow, I could stop. I could stop and see if they need something. And I mean, yeah, okay, I'm a single woman. I don't necessarily feel safe stopping on the side of the highway with just anybody, their car broken down or whatever. But it wasn't that. It's really more about I just realized if I'm not part of the solution, I'm part of the problem. And this is, to me, a lot of what we're facing with this global immigrant crisis is we're facing, are we part of the solution and not the solution, these very obviously not even a band-aid on a crisis types of solutions, but larger, more intelligent, creatively designed by critical thinkers like us solutions. Okay. And okay, maybe it would take us a decade to come up with a really incredible solution, but there's still going to be this issue a decade from now on some level. if we don't at least get going on visioning those solutions. So we're doing a lot of visioning of new earth and what does it look like down the road. And there is the possibility of instant activation of some of these visions that we're seeing. Absolutely. I am not saying that we need to just give up and feel like we've got to do all the work ourselves. But what I've been shown over the years is we do need to do some of the work ourselves. We do need to get into the groove and start working with our God-given ingenuity. We are such incredibly adaptable, ingenious creatures that have the capacity to design phenomenal solutions. We've just been basically conditioned into complacency and apathy. And that's actually really exhausting to live under that kind of tyranny and that kind of restriction and limitation of choice. It's because so many of these choices have been removed from us that we have a hard time facing choices at this point. So let's look at this crisis from that lens. I'm going to shuffle, tilt the screen. I'll do some cards on this and then I'll have a look at your comments. It's pretty fascinating to have these conversations and, you know, to feel safe enough to have all different aspects, all different emotional responses and fears and challenges safe to be brought forward and heard respectfully. This isn't about, you know, shame on you if this pushes your buttons and you're saying, I don't, you know, I can't open my arms to this. It feels so wrong. I feel upset. I feel angry about it. That perspective and that experience has a right to be heard and to be part of the solution. Because every one of the, you know, when you work in like a kind of a consensus model with a group of people, every person's perspective, every fear, every concern has a gift in it. So the designing, the co-creation of these solutions need all different kinds of inputs. And this is part of what makes them so rich, complex, and sustainable. When you come up with solutions that actually address everything, it takes longer, but wow, those kinds of things often turn out to be win-win solutions that are really sustainable. And quite frankly, we don't see a lot of those models in our modern world anymore, do we? So here's us, afraid. And here's what do we need to know about the crisis? How do we need to respond? What do we need to know? Past, present, near future. Interesting. Oh, really interesting. Wow. Wow. Oh, this wasn't what I expected, but that's fun and fascinating. So here's us being scared. And just like I said about the car analogy, you know, this brings up for all of us, honestly, I feel like when we look at these scenarios, some part of us gets our dander up because some fear in us is like, I don't ever want that to happen to me. Like, we got to make a country that's safe and strong and resilient and stable and, you know, like all of these things. And that's absolutely true. However, when we design that model from a power central authority base. It is, as I have said many times, it's only a matter of time where it's going to corrupt itself from within, because nature doesn't work like that. Nature doesn't work in like, there's one ecosystem for the whole planet, right? It's like that just wouldn't be sustainable. It wouldn't flourish. So we are afraid when we look at this that we'll be next. And we want to prevent that by resisting this influx of people who appear to be resonating with that frequency of that trauma. And we're like, I don't want that trauma in my reality. So this is where we get into the concept of Ho'oponopono. If you haven't heard of it, I really highly recommend that you look it up. It's a Hawaiian prayer system, and it's based on the belief that whatever enters into our field of awareness is part of us and is partly our responsibility. So, and I guess from the Christian Bible, we can draw on the stories of the Good Samaritans, that this whole idea that if you come upon someone in need, you're being asked from that Christ consciousness to respond in the way that Christ would respond. So again, here we are saying, how do we respond in a healthy way, but not get completely bowled over and neutralized by this trauma? Another system model that I'm familiar with is, I'm going to go back to Ho'oponopono too. Sorry, I'm being a Gemini right now. But another system model that I'm familiar with is in working in communities and groups. There's a magic percentile of 15% who are in need of care, of being supported, either temporarily in a transitional way or long-term disability support. And if it goes above that 15 percentile within a healthy population dynamic, it actually deteriorates the strength of the overall population. So there's something about keeping that energy sort of under 20%, where we are responding, but we're keeping our sovereign autonomy and strength as a collective without taking on too much. So there is a sense of, spreading this diversely around the planet, spreading the response diversely around the planet, which to me also includes not just allocating these people to the limited resources of jobs and housing and stuff that are in urban centers. Again, it's about, let's look at creating more diverse, rural, small town, small village, sustainable, local. Let's start integrating more of these populations in that percentile into these regions, into the rural regions, with very specific, intelligent procedures and protocols for adaptation, for creating cohesion in the region and the community. I know this brings up huge topics of concern and challenge. It doesn't matter which way we dice it. We're going to have to talk about these scary things and come up with lots of creative solutions, not one solution and not one central power dominant authority response to this, but diverse response. And Spirit, what do we need to know about the global refugee crisis is the yes card. It's the time to say yes to creating more of a purposeful, each of us as individuals, the sovereign individual in the recent past, each of us stepping forward and saying, I will take one little portion of this responsibility. I will figure out one creative thing I can do. Look at this. 2 by 2, adopt a family. I never even thought of this, but there you go. 2 by 2 by 2, pairing, buddy systems. Obviously, I'm knowing some of you, my viewers, are, women living alone, middle-aged women living alone. Obviously, this isn't necessarily realistic for everybody, but it's an invitation to start creatively imagining if there's anything in your toolkit, in your resource kit of life and connections and experience and any sort of resource that you have that you could add to this this meaningful contribution of creating some diverse responses to this challenge that isn't just waiting for government to deal with it. So this is what I'm sensing. We are, again, so much of the response to these challenges throughout history has been by small, local communities, individuals, and concerned groups. So much of it, 80% of it, historically. 80% of our response to crises on whatever level by our neighbors has been based on, like, our modern day sort of crowdfunding campaigns, or like people, just average people coming up with practical solutions. 80% is what the guides are saying. And I bet if we actually research it, it's true. Even some of these large charities started off as just a few people operating out of a church basement. So I'm wanting to extend the gratitude right now from the guides. They're saying some of you have already done this. Some of you have already been doing this. And if you've already had experience with this kind of response, we really need, we being the collective, if we're having conversations about that, we really need your input, because oh yeah, well, this was really great. This part of what we did worked, but this part was a disaster. So we need that feedback. So anyone who has been doing this, step forward into the conversation, leave a comment, and okay, last little message here. And then I'm going to look at your comments. Last little message is, I want to say this. It's like when we are forced to make a choice, or we make a choice on our own initiative. I'm trying to think of an analogy from my own life. I feel like I'm going almost into my teenage years or something, and thinking about, yeah, actually, I've got a really great analogy. It's quite funny. It has to do with me wanting to leave high school when I was 16. I decided I'd had enough. Well, join the club, right? And so I decided I was going to drop out of high school and just work. And I already had a couple of part-time jobs because I was pretty, entrepreneurial even back in those days. And so I went to my mom, and in all her wisdom, as I approach her as a 16-year-old saying, I'm going to drop out of high school, we have the legal right at 16 to do that. And I was pretty impressed that I could make a choice like that, right? And so this is the choice card, the Lovers. And so I, approach her, and she, in all her wisdom, did not say, absolutely not. You go to your room right now. She said, oh, that's an interesting idea. When are you thinking of doing that? And I was like, well, I'm thinking like by the end of June, like, the end of the school year, this will be my last year. And she's like, oh, okay. Well, July 1st, then I'll start expecting whatever it was, some small amount back then, but it was a little big deal for me, like $200 a month rent or something like that, right? And I was like, oh, okay. I still remember going back to my room and sitting there on my bed going, $200 a month. Okay, right now I make $250 a month in my part-time jobs or whatever it was, right? And I was like, oh, I don't know if I really want to do this way. And so by giving me the choice and saying, yeah, you're free to make that choice, and these are the consequences if you make that choice or this choice, I grew up that day. And this is what this is showing me. This is saying, like, we have an opportunity before this comes to a point where there is no more choice. We have an opportunity to choose, because we see that this isn't just going to disappear. And that the truth is, it could be us. We could be in this situation of being, just like me going like, oh, so I could leave school, but I'm going to have to pay rent. It's like at some point we are needing to respond to this. And if we do it, if we actually take the mature responsibility of saying, I'm going to respond to this before it's on my own doorstep, before it's such a crisis that there is no choice and there's no choice of how I respond. I'm going to respond now, and it feels empowered. If I wait, look at that, 10 of Wands. Just being part of a purposeful, empowered response feels so good. It feels so good. And sitting in the sidelines and projecting our ideals, which we're not willing to stand behind with action, it's kind of scary. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. Oh, thank you, Valerie. Your experience of being on the side of the road, and let's all think about that. Next time we're driving by, and this is a scenario that we are actually in right now. And again, even just if we're operating from Christian principle, it's like we are paying it forward. We are paying it forward. And yeah, Maureen, thank you. So important to have the vision and trust that the universe will make it happen, collaborating with like-spirited people to make it happen. And thank you, Sue. I've learned not to complain without coming up with solutions. Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. Moon Garden. How about the toxic waste from the train derailments? Apparently, if they deem an environment as toxic by air, land, and water, they can make you leave, relocate, and close these areas permanently. Okay, we're going to take, technically, I like to go for an hour, so we'll take that last 10 minutes and have a look at that question. Yeah, right? We are looking at, the guides are saying, as much as it feels super upsetting and we get really angry when we feel like, okay, these things are being planted to purposefully manage and manipulate us. And wow, does that ever make us mad, right? I mean, it makes me mad. And when you're mad, how creatively are you thinking? Yeah. When you're mad, you're actually sad and scared. You're scared that you live in a world where there's beings that will do that to other beings. And what kind of a world is that? And this is where, again, we get into some of these long-standing mystical traditions, including the esoteric Christian traditions around, like, it's not about forgiveness and just like, okay, beings can get away with doing whatever they want and not being held accountable. But it really is about the most important business at hand is to create responses where these challenges that are coming at us stimulate a creative response that could actually turn out to be something that will serve us beneficially for eons to come. So instead of seeing us as victims of these perpetrators' agendas, we can say, well, it can be whether these derailments and these toxic spills all over the planet are intentional. They're certainly man-made, but some of the catastrophes that are making areas uninhabitable, we aren't absolutely certain that they're man-made. We are aware that more of it is man-made than we used to think. But what if there's just a whole variety of different challenges because we're at this activation point on planet Earth? The world is waking up and rebirthing itself. And so, I like to say that too, that these agendas, these manipulative agendas, are part of the awakening. So they play their role. And if we get fixated on feeling victimized and angry and scared about the power that they're wielding, well, we're actually giving them the power of our focus and our thoughts and our intentions and our attention. And we're in that angry state or fearful state. We can't think creatively. So when we turn our attention to responding, not out of absolute desperation, like, oh, why even bother? It's hopeless, but to actually respond because responding feels good, right? To get us out of this inertia of defeat and into feeling like we make a difference, into connecting, communicating, connecting the dots, and then taking action. This is one of the things about the magician, right? The magician, we see this as a communicator card, an activator card, but he has all the tools of the tarot. You see that on his table. He's got the wand, the sword, the cup, and the pentacle. So he doesn't just channel the vision or the intel or the information. He channels the way to respond to it using all the elements at his disposal. So we're being asked to take the intel and do something. Three of Pentacles, create something, create a response. And of course, the best way to create those responses is to look at responses that solve more than one issue, right? Yeah, like responses that are not just a temporary band-aid, but will be still feeling the effect 6 generations down the road or 7 generations into the future for the children of the future. Again, the short term, just drive by the car, get home, make your dinner, you're tired anyway, it's not your responsibility, or you don't know. You don't know what gets set in motion. You stop, you help the person, you take a response of some kind, and maybe that starts to set in motion something in your life. It changes things. It activates things. This card in this position beside the judgment card reminds me of another parable from the Bible. It's the loaves and fishes. I say this quite frequently. It is this phenomena where we actually don't realize how much resource, ingenuity, creativity, collective energy, once you get involved in solution building, even by taking one little step in a direction, it exponentially expands. It's like a phenomena. It like literally, next thing you know, there's more than enough. And again, if we can go beyond the refugee crisis into not just solving the refugee crisis, but saying, let's have resource and safe, healthy, vibrant community building responses for all citizens of Earth. So we're not just dealing with crises. Tilt the screen. We're going to look one last time here at this topic of the toxic spills. And our responses. And does this put us in a position where we have to leave an environment and move to safety? Wow. Okay. Moon Goddess, this was a very good question. I feel like I'm actually going to include it in my conversation on client response to perceived different versions of climate crises and environmental crises, because what is being shown here to me is, okay. So what they're saying is, instead of focusing on uncovering the conspiracy behind these toxic spills, they're saying go right to the heart of it in a way that actually is in alliance with their agenda, if that makes sense. So they're saying, okay, we've got these, we can say, well, this has been staged and this is having this effect. But bottom line is still that we're talking about, when it's oil spills or train derailments with toxic chemical spills, or, freighters in the ocean with toxic spills or whatever, it still at this point can be traced to corporate power, financial power, and what do we do to create accountability in these corporate entities? So people on both sides of the fence can get on board with addressing, instead of proving the conspiracy version, we can address the accepted version that this is about putting the power of where our resource money is spent, how our resources are managed. This is, again, we're focusing on the nuts and bolts of things, because this can get to be, pardon the pun, but a very slippery slope. And I'm not saying that people don't need to follow down the rabbit hole to find the bottom line of these stories, but just finding that is not going to stop it. I think we're kind of realizing that now, right? We're kind of realizing that just outing these different corporate entities and global elite entities and off-world entities and so on, and just pointing the finger at them. Meanwhile, the majority of people are looking in a completely different direction and just are calling us whatever, It's like we go for, it's not like we're taking a consolation approach and just going for what we can go for. It's actually, in the long run, going to solve both problems, is what they're saying. So they're saying really go into looking at the power structure of resources, resource management, and so on. How are our resources transported? Transportation. So areas of agriculture, industry, transportation, resource extraction, those are who we are going towards and really focusing on, bringing them to task, to accountability, and also bringing, so that these things don't become more and more and more out of the hands of individuals. So there's something about the whole privatization versus, government ownership of things. And it feels like there's a lot about us getting our say back into these corporations, these companies, and giving more of the rights of how we move our goods around to smaller companies, to smaller regional companies, smaller localized companies. And again, it's like they are trying to get us to look over here, look over here, look over here. Meanwhile, what we respond to over here is actually going to solve a lot of issues all at once. So I hope that makes sense. I know it's just starting to scratch the surface of some of these ideologies and looking at it from different angles. I would love to be part of conversations and brainstorming think tanks around how we respond and create alternatives, how we create alternatives to these large corporate entities that have just, of course, gone megalomaniac on planet Earth. So, yes, just checking in to say fare thee well, everyone. Love it. Do not worry about pronunciation. It's hard in the English language. Yes, it is. Thank you. The elites and corporations are crashing. We will be rebuilding as we take responsibility for a more just and humanitarian life. Maureen, thank you. And Moon Garden, Kin's domains are one way around. Yeah. So if you even think about like a lot of these goods that are being transported on these trains and planes and boats and so on, like if we stop using the goods from these sources, well, the more of us that withdraw our, they say we vote with our payments, with our currency, the more of us that withdraw from a lot of those systems start to slowly deteriorate and break down. And of course, as we know, we've also got the energy of spirit activating everything here. These corporate entities, these global elite entities, they're tripping on their own tails right now a lot. So yes, they will eventually, that whole system will eventually consume itself, but why wait and be, just sort of milling about in that rubble? Why not start to create the alternatives together now? And there's no reason for us to have to wait for that to crumble in order to have a much more beneficial, viable alternative in place. So that's the prayer that I'm leaving you all with. Have a beautiful week. Please leave your comments in the comment section here, or leave your comments below if you're watching later. Blessings to you all. Bye for now.